I'm delighted to welcome everyone to this webinar and to this webinar series. Learning Policy Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and policy organization that conducts and communicates high-quality research to inform policy. And we arm policymakers with the data that you need and the evidence-based solutions that you're seeking for major problems that you're facing in the states today. We're thrilled to have 4 webinars that will occur over this week and next to address serious problems that many states are facing, including recruiting and retaining teachers and ensuring that they are well prepared, dealing with the chronic absenteeism that has been a part of the country's challenges since the pandemic, and taking on emerging topics in school finance, which is on everyone's mind every legislative session. So we're delighted to welcome you here to participate in all of this series. In the series, you'll learn about what's known from research, but also to hear from states that are using this knowledge to make a difference in their own contexts. To the next slide. The way we tackle the issues in the Learning Policy Institute is to really try to get at the root causes of ongoing challenges and to really try to address long-term solutions for those challenges. With respect to recruiting and retaining the teacher workforce, which is what you'll hear about in this webinar and the next one, we have looked at these issues for many years in a variety of ways. And one of the key elements that emerges when we think about long-term solutions is that retention of teachers is every bit as important as recruitment, especially in times of recurring shortages. In fact, 9 out of every 10 vacancies each year are a function of people who left the workforce the year before. And typically only a quarter to a third of those people are leaving for retirement reasons. There are other reasons that teachers leave that can be addressed by policy and are being successfully addressed in some places. That is both as a function of preparation. People who are well prepared stay longer in teaching than those who are underprepared. Those who come into teaching to fill vacancies without preparation leave at twice the rate in the first year as those who come in with comprehensive preparation. Mentoring equally makes a difference in those early years in the classroom. Salaries and working conditions, of course, also matter. And we have looked at these issues across the states. We provide tools for states to evaluate their own situation and to address these factors, and then raise up new strategies that are working to provide long-term solutions to these kinds of challenges, both by retaining teachers longer in the profession and preparing them to be effective earlier in their careers. And so to get this going, we've got a wonderful battery of researchers from the Learning Policy Institute to kick this off, and you'll hear from some of your state colleagues shortly. And Melanie Longanier is the first researcher that you'll see. Here comes Melanie, who's been doing work on these labor market issues for multiple years and has some very useful tools and insights to present. Melanie, take it away.
Thank you, Linda. So just a quick reminder before we get started, all of the slides presented today will be shared with you after the webinar. So don't worry if you miss out on something, it's going to be in your inbox very soon. So let's get started. Great. So I'm sure we all know it's important for so many reasons to build and retain a strong and diverse teacher workforce, but we wanted to start today's conversation by describing the many costs that students and schools and society pay when there is high teacher turnover. So about 1 in 6 teachers are leaving their school or the profession annually. About half are leaving their school and half are leaving the profession. And this is according to the most recent national data. And turnover rates in the US are actually quite a bit higher than in most other countries. And teacher attrition is also concentrated among schools with fewer resources. And so these are schools that are often serving more students of color and students from low-income households. So this is an important education equity issue because these students are bearing the brunt of the many consequences and costs of teacher turnover. So let's take a look at these consequences. So first, academically, many studies find that students have lower achievement gains when they are in schools with higher teacher turnover. And this is partly because socially, higher teacher turnover is associated with lower trust and weaker relationships between teachers and their students, which negatively impacts school climate and then also negatively impacts learning. This isn't very surprising. You know, it takes time to build trust and relationships and for teachers to understand their students and address their students' needs. And then school improvement efforts are also hindered by high levels of staff turnover. Staff turnover can disrupt norms and structures and knowledge that's built over time. Resources that schools and districts spend on professional development can't go very far if the teachers you train don't really stay to implement the new reforms or practices. And finally, there are significant financial costs of teacher turnover. LPI recently updated our teacher turnover calculator, which estimates how much teacher turnover costs. We have 3 estimates based on district size, which ranges from about $12,000 per teacher in a small district to about $25,000 in a large district. So it can get very substantial. So given the many consequences and costs of teacher turnover, what can states be doing to strengthen their teacher workforce? So we wanted to start today diving into the meat of this by introducing one LPI resource that we hope can help state leaders and policymakers analyze the state of your teacher workforce and then identify areas that you can leverage to better recruit and retain teachers. So let's dive in. The state of the teacher workforce tool is a map, and it shows a range of national and state level statistics on the teacher workforce. And yeah, there's a link that's included. There are over 40 indicators in the map, and these indicators we selected based on prior research that shows are important to retaining teachers and having a strong teacher labor market. And these indicators are grouped into 3 broad categories. The first is this green teaching attractiveness bubble. Which is the extent to which what states make teaching a desirable profession. So the indicators in this bucket includes compensation, working conditions, resources, and teacher turnover. The blue bubble is teacher equity, which shows the extent to which schools serving different shares of students of color and students from low-income backgrounds have access to experienced and certified teachers. And then the orange bubble is some other factors that affect supply and demand for teachers, and this includes changes in student enrollment, which is important for state policymakers to also consider. So the map, which we'll show in a moment, displays the data for each state, what it looks like relative to other states, as well as the US average. And there are so many indicators, so we have 2 summary ratings on teaching attractiveness and teacher equity. And, it's important to note that the teacher workforce is complicated and there are a lot of nuances that aren't captured by, even 40 indicators. So bear that in mind when interpreting the map, and contextual factors matter. So here's what the ratings look like on the map. The green map on the left is teaching attractiveness ratings, and then the blue map on the right is the teacher equity ratings. It's color-coded based on quintiles, so essentially the darker the color, the more desirable the situation is, so more attractive or more equitable. On the left, the states in the darker green are highest ranked in terms of teaching attractiveness. You can see they tend to be clustered in the Midwestern and Northeastern regions. And on the right, the states with the darker blue colors have a more equitable distribution of well-qualified teachers, so certified teachers and experienced teachers. You'll notice that some of these tend to be smaller states that might not be as diverse. So let's look at some of the individual indicators on the map. And we're going to start with salary, which we all know is key to teacher recruitment and retention, and basically for attracting people to any job or profession. So highest salaries increase both the quantity as well as quality of the teacher candidate pool. And many teacher surveys have also found that increasing teacher salaries is a preferred strategy that teachers say would increase retention. So our map offers information shown here on the average starting salary for a teacher with a bachelor's degree in 2022-23 school year. And this is adjusted for cost of living differences across states. The average starting salary nationally is $44,530. And this varies, of course, across states. In Montana, Colorado, New Hampshire, and Oregon, starting salary is under $40,000. And in 8 states and DC, so these are the colors, the states shaded darker green, starting salaries go above $50,000. So we're going to hear more about this today in the panel discussion. There has been a lot of pushes at the federal, state, local level to increase teacher salaries, not just for new teachers, but for teachers at various stages of their careers. So I'm very excited to hear more in a second. But let's look more into some other indicators first. So next is leadership support. A lot of studies show that teacher retention is very strongly associated with supportive school leadership, and it is one of the very key factor for retaining teachers. So our map includes one metric that captures leadership support. So basically, this is a survey that asks teachers, is your school admin supportive and encouraging? And it shows the teachers who strongly agree. Nationally, just over half of teachers indicate that they have a supportive and encouraging administrator. In 6 states, this goes under 45%. And in 3 states, that's Idaho, Kentucky, and Utah, just over 60% of teachers reporting having a supportive administrator. But you can see the range goes from 45 to 60%. Overall, across the board, reports of supportive leadership are quite low across the nation. Now, there are many things that states can do to ensure that school leaders are well prepared and well supported so that they, in turn, can support their teachers well. Leaders play a critical role in implementing state policies that support teacher development, like providing mentorship and professional development, especially key for retaining new teachers. And they're also key for creating supportive working environments. So it's important for states to consider how to train their leaders to do that effectively. And there are many ways to do that, including setting high standards for administrator preparation and licensure, developing a strong leadership pipeline, and providing funding for leadership training and coaching. Okay, next indicator is uncertified teachers. Teacher certification is very important because research shows that teachers who are fully certified and well prepared are much more likely to stay teaching, and they also tend to be more effective compared to teachers who are not fully certified. So these include teachers, on emergency permits that schools might have to hire because they are unable to fill open positions with certified teachers. Teacher shortages is a very severe issue in a lot of places. And so these teachers often have little to no preparation and might not be very equipped to face the challenges of the classroom. So our map shows data on the percent of teachers who have not met state certification requirements. So it includes teachers on emergency permits. Nationally, this is just under 4%. And in several states, this goes under 1%. So that seems to be good news. But on the flip side, we see that in 4 states and DC, over 10% of teachers, these states are shaded in light green, are uncertified. So you can see there is substantial variation across the country. So states are the ones that set certification requirements for teachers, and to have a well-qualified teacher workforce, they need to set high professional standards, but also they need to provide the supports and incentives for teacher candidates to meet these standards. And so plugging our webinar for Thursday, which focuses on strategies to create high quality and affordable pathways into the profession, including teacher residencies. So in the meantime, we have a lot of uncertified teachers in the classroom, and we want to make sure that they are well supported as well. So we'll hear in a moment from our panelists how they are doing so through some early career teacher supports. Okay, so Let's switch from teaching attractiveness indicators to some equity indicators. Our map includes several of these because it's important that all students have access to well-qualified and experienced teachers. Decades of research has found that students of color and students from low-income households generally have less access to these teachers, so we thought it was really important to include these indicators in the map. So this slide shows one of those indicators, which is the difference in the percent of uncertified teachers between high and low poverty schools. Basically, we subtract the percent of uncertified teachers in high poverty schools by that in low poverty schools. So I'm going to show you right now. In US, this gap is 3.3 percentage points, which comes from comparing the 5.7% of uncertified teachers in high poverty schools with the 2.4% in low poverty schools. So that difference is the 3.3 percentage points. So basically a number that is smaller, a smaller gap reflects a more equitable distribution of teachers, and a higher number indicates a less equitable, more inequitable distribution of teachers. So we want to see this number low. There are 7 states with gaps that are more than double the national average. So these are the states shown in light blue, where there is inequitable distribution of well-qualified teachers. And then there are 6 states with negative gaps, which actually indicates that the percentage of uncertified teachers is higher in lower poverty schools. Now, states can help address the inequitable distribution of teachers by targeting resources to support teacher recruitment and retention, especially in high-need schools. And these can include loan forgiveness programs, service scholarship programs, as well as incentives programs for national board certified teachers to stay in high-need schools. For those of you who are not familiar, the national board certified teachers are those who have achieved advanced certification through a rigorous process. So they're very well qualified and experienced teachers who often serve as mentors in their schools. Increased funding to improve resources and working conditions in high need schools would also be very important. And next Thursday's webinar, we're going to dig more into the importance of equitable school funding formulas. So make sure you tune into that as well. So that was a lot of data points, and I know we're all excited to zoom in to learn more about what's happening in the States and hear from Mississippi and New York. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Susan.
Thanks so much, Melanie. So as Melanie mentioned, my name is Susan Patrick, and I'll be moderating the panel today. I started my career as a middle school teacher, teaching in both North Carolina and Ohio, and I'm now a senior researcher at LPI. So we're really thankful to have 3 panelists joining us to talk about policies in their state to support and retain teachers. But before we dig into the panel discussion, I wanted to provide some brief context from the map, actually, about why we've selected folks from Mississippi and New York to talk about their state policies. So we're going to start just briefly talking about Mississippi. So for Mississippi, they've engaged in a concerted effort to increase teacher salaries in recent years, including a historic salary increase in 2022. So according to the NEA's Teacher Salary Benchmark Report, Mississippi teachers had a 12% increase in average salaries between the 21-22 and 22-23 year, the second highest increase among all 50 states. As you can see from the map data, they rank highly on cost of living, adjusted starting salary, and wage competitiveness. Nationally, teachers make much less than similarly educated professionals, but that gap is much smaller in Mississippi than it is nationally and among neighboring states. We go now on to New York. So for New York, we wanted to highlight a few different indicators from the map that make New York highly rated for teaching attractiveness. First, their teachers rate their working conditions relatively highly. We wanted to point out the mentoring for early career teachers and the time for professional development, because those are 2 things we'll be discussing today. New York is also highly rated on school resources. As we'll talk about today, part of the approach of the New York State Education Department is setting policies for districts to implement high quality teacher development efforts, and having sufficient school and district resources is very critical to being able to implement those policies. So with that, we're going to turn to our panel. All right, and I think we'll be, our panelists are going to be appearing on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and start by welcoming them and providing some brief bios, and then we'll get started. So first, I'd like to introduce Representative Kent McCarty from Mississippi. He has served in the Mississippi House of Representatives since 2019, representing House District 101 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He serves as vice chair on the Education Committee in the Mississippi House. He is a small business owner and has campaigned on the importance of supporting public education and small businesses. Next, I want to introduce William Murphy, Deputy Commissioner for Higher Education for the New York State Education Department, where he coordinates policy, regulatory, and programmatic oversight for colleges and universities in the state. He also oversees teacher and leader certification policy implementation across school districts and college teacher and leader development programs. And finally, I'd like to introduce Alexander Tricolinos, the Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Teacher and Leader Development at the New York State Education Department. He started his career as a classroom teacher and has served in many previous roles in schools and at NCSED. He has extensive experience in teacher and school leader development, effective educator preparation practices, professional learning, and recruitment of promising and diverse educator candidates. And I think now, I think we're waiting for Melanie's screen to get taken down, but I think all of our panelists will appear, and then we'll get started with a question that is for all of our panelists. Okay, so I would like to ask all of you to help the audience understand some of the challenges your state has faced with its educator workforce, particularly challenges you faced with retaining teachers. And I'm going to go to Representative McCarty first, and if you could just tell us a little bit about what's happening in Mississippi.
Sure thing. Well, thank you again. Thank you all so much for having us. I'm excited to talk about this. It's obviously taken up a lot of our time in the last few years in the legislature, and I can't think of anything more worthy than working on public education stuff. So I'm happy to be here. I guess the situation in Mississippi is really truly no different than I think what we see across the country, just a little bit more the Mississippi version of it. So I guess, you know, we struggle to find teachers. We struggle to recruit new teachers. We struggle to retain teachers just like everybody else. Our problems here were exacerbated, you know, 4 or 5 years back because our starting salary was among the lowest in the country for new teachers. And even if you look specifically at our region in the Southeast, it was, you know, much lower than a lot of our neighbors. I think at the time we were slightly above Arkansas, which, you know, they've made some huge gains as well. But at the time we passed this big pay raise a few years ago, we were, I think, just above them in starting salary. So we're having a real hard time attracting people into the profession. The problem was much worse in areas that are already economically disadvantaged, more rural areas of the Mississippi Delta, where there's just not a lot of growth. They're losing, you know, thousands and thousands of people, you know, yearly, or, you know, every time we update, it seems like they've lost more people. So as everyone moves out and more resources leave those communities, it's very hard for us to then recruit people to move there to teach. And it's hard for them to pull from their own communities because those people are looking to move. Those who can are looking to move. So it was really just, you know, and remains to be the case now that it's a lot more difficult for us in those areas. But that's something we wanted to address. Obviously, we wanted to address the broad problem, but we really wanted to look at those areas where students were already economically disadvantaged, schools were already struggling with funding, schools were struggling to hire. And that's kind of been our focus. And then around the same time, we did this big pay raise bill. Among a few other things, a report came out from a group, an education advocacy group in Mississippi, Mississippi First, that does a lot of really great education work, that basically said, you know, there are so few people in these educator prep programs that we are going to just run out, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years. There's just nobody there. So that was kind of the situation. A lot of this, you know, obviously goes back way before COVID, but was just made worse, I think, in the immediate aftermath of COVID. So we, you know, have tried to respond accordingly since then.
Great. And we're going to get into a lot of those responses in the panel. So we'll turn it over to our two colleagues from New York to talk a little bit about what we've been facing when it comes to teacher retention.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And yeah, similar to what our Representative McCarty has mentioned, you know, in New York, we have issues that are both really, they've been endemic issues that have gone on a long time, but also issues that have popped up that we've tried to come up with really innovative solutions on that, you know, hopefully we'll touch on in more detail as we move along here. But before my colleague Alex gives a little bit more of a quantitative picture of what we're dealing with like retention issues, I just wanted to kind of offer like the larger picture. You know, New York, it's no secret, we're incredibly complex. We're a large state. The issues that might be facing what we call like our North Country regions, which are less populated, are very different from like our more urban areas that have a lot of issues related to like linguistic diversity, English language learners. In the North Country, you know, they'll tell us, you know, we can't find, you know, world language teachers. We can't find teachers like in the advanced STEM areas. And then as we go out to areas of like Long Island, you know, it might look a lot different and a lot more broad. And just like the scope of this is, over the years, our teacher certification system, what we've been hearing is it's gotten so large and complex and Byzantine that they've asked us to say, you know, can you please make this system a little bit more, a little more flexibility, a little more innovation, and make it a little closer to the district so that they can pivot more quickly. So what we've been really hard at work at for the past 4 years is digging into what are the regulations and the laws and policies that we can amend. Some months, literally in front of our Board of Regents, we're going sometimes on a monthly basis with an amendment to our teacher certification regs. And then we want to couple that with a lot of the different forward-thinking, innovative grant programs, which we'll touch on a little later. We have our Teachers of Tomorrow, Teacher Opportunity Corps, a lot of grow your own like initiatives that are going on. And then the last is to underscore all this. We really want to do the substantive things, even related to like our teacher evaluation system, so that all these changes we're making related to like retention and professional development and things on the pre-service side and in-service side, all of these things are kind of working together, and you're pushing the levers to, you know, be able to take advantage of it, and not just do these one-off programs, that are not connected to like larger substantive policy changes in New York State. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to my colleague, Alex, and he can give a little bit more of a quantitative picture of what we're dealing with retention.
Sure. Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Susan, for inviting us to the conversation today. So like Bill said, I'm just going to provide a little bit of overview of what the picture, the landscape looks like here in New York. And the first thing I want to say is that I think it's first important that we acknowledge that right now is a really challenging time to be an educator. So I think some of what we're going to share probably isn't that surprising and mirrors what you all are seeing in other states. So last year, New York had a 22% turnover rate for teachers with fewer than 5 years of experience, and we had a 14% overall turnover rate. These numbers have been pretty consistent over the past 3 years, and they are significantly higher than our pre-COVID turnover rate. So while the pre-COVID numbers fluctuate obviously from year to year, in the year immediately preceding the pandemic, our turnover rate was actually just below 10%. So there's been a significant increase in turnover, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic. To put a little bit more context around that, when we disaggregate the data, what we see is that historically our turnover challenges were more likely to be associated with large urban school districts and higher need school systems, I think echoing what was said earlier. But actually more recently, although we do still see that those types of districts are driving our turnover, we also see that there's an increase in teachers leaving the profession from all types of school districts, including those that have not historically had turnover challenges. And then at the same time that we're experiencing this greater need for teachers, we're also still working to rebuild the new entrants into our educator preparation programs, particularly in hard to staff subject areas. So again, as most states saw, we had a pretty significant decline in enrollment in educator preparation programs beginning around 2012 and continuing through 2015. Since then, in New York, our numbers have stabilized, and recently we've actually seen a year-to-year increase in enrollments, which we think is very promising and hopefully is related to some of the residency and apprenticeship work that we're doing. But when you put these two things together, what we see on the ground in school districts is something that we hate to see, which is that they are increasingly relying on long-term substitute teachers and what we call incidental teaching, which is you have certified teachers in your schools, but you're assigning them to teach things that are outside of their certificate area. While those flexibilities are, of course, necessary for school districts to employ, we know that they're really not appropriate long-term solutions if our goal is to ensure that all students have equitable access to high-quality teachers, right? So we are really trying to address both of those challenges at the same time, both helping folks who are in the profession stay, but also encouraging our K-12 and college-age students, as well as adults who might be interested in making a career change, to see teaching as a desirable career.
Wonderful. Thank you all for kind of setting the context for us. So next, I want to turn specifically to Mississippi and talk about teacher compensation. So competitive compensation is really critical for recruiting and retaining teachers. We've already touched on the fact that Mississippi passed a historic teacher salary increase in 2022. So Representative McCarty, can you tell us a little bit about that process for passing that legislation and what you've heard about its impact so far?
Sure. So that legislation came about. I originally started working on that in 2020 when the report that I mentioned earlier came out. That just basically laid out how dire the situation was and how, currently was and how it was only projected to get worse. So we knew that we had, Mississippi was one of the states that, only economically, but economically benefited from a lot of the things that happened during COVID. So we actually found our budget was in a better situation than it had been in a long time in 2020, 2021, 22. So we had a large surplus that we had not had in the state in recent memory. And it was our chairman's, desire to use whatever we could to try to, stop the bleeding and to try to also, incentivize some new recruitment into the education profession. So the way our state funds education and sets teacher salaries is all from the top down. So we have a statewide salary schedule that basically lays out the minimum you must pay teachers in every single year of their profession based on the amount of education they've received. So if you've got a bachelor's, you've got one scale, master's is another scale, specialist, doctorate. So there's 4 separate scales. So what we found was that Mississippi, we actually compensated our, doctorate holding teachers very well. In comparison to the states around us, it was, much higher than other states in our region and ranked very well nationally. The problem was there were about 40 of those in the whole state. So for the other, the vast majority of teachers, they were not receiving that benefit. So what we sought to do with the amount of money we had, which was upwards of $250 million, was to try to, we wanted to invest the money, but we wanted to invest it in a way that kind of reimagined the way that we compensate the teachers, the whole schedule from the bottom up. So where we found most of our issues were in competing with the states around us was on the front end of that scale. So very low starting pay, but we had always had yearly increases that teachers had gotten used to that were built into the scale. So districts are free to pay more if they like, but they have to pay the state minimum. And again, there's an increase called the step increase every year that they work. So we were confronted with a lot of challenges. And how do we fix this? We wanted to increase on the front end, but we also knew that those step increases were kind of baked into the system, and that taking those away and also not compensating those veteran teachers would probably create a system where most of the teachers that we really wanted to keep in the later years of their career were disillusioned with the whole process, and maybe that would not do much to incentivize them to stay. So it was important for us that we boosted on the front end, but also kept those increases throughout the duration of the teacher's career. So we were able to preserve those step increases. We were able to still give a bit of a raise to those teachers that had advanced degrees who were already pretty well compensated by comparison, but we didn't want them to feel left out either. So it really was a true, obviously, these kinds of issues are bipartisan wins across the board, but more impressively for Mississippi, I don't know how every state's different, but the House and Senate actually came together and made a better bill in the end in working together. That very rarely happens in Mississippi. I would imagine a lot of you feel the same way in working with your states, but we actually took parts of what they want to do, what we want to do, and made a better bill in the end that really, I think addressed a lot of the concerns that we had about making the scale make more sense, and then also fairly compensated those at the higher end of their degrees. So we have seen an increase in those that have completed teacher or educator prep programs. since we passed it. The numbers are up about 20% from those pre-pandemic numbers. From a peak, last year was the peak, and they've come down a bit since last year, but still, even now, up about 20% from pre-pandemic. I would imagine it's probably a combination of the large pay increases, which was about a 10% increase across the board for teachers based on their salary the previous year, in concert with like a bunch of other things we've done as well. But that was obviously a big motivator, I would think, in recruitment and in retention as well.
Wonderful. And we're going to get to some of those other things that the state has been doing a little later. So, and I want to turn to New York to talk a little bit about the importance of new teacher mentoring and induction. So new teacher mentoring and induction, when well designed and supported, can really increase the retention of new teachers. It can help them, grow in their professional practice. So I want to turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Murphy and Assistant Commissioner Trickolinos to talk about how New York has been working to ensure quality new teacher mentoring and induction programs are happening across the state.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Susan. I think I'll answer this question for us. So I think we agree with what you just said 100%, right? We know how important new teacher supports are, both for retention and the early career effectiveness of our educators. We in New York there's kind of a two-tiered approach. The first is that we put a regulatory requirement into place that basically ensures that all school districts have to have a well-developed, clearly defined first-year mentoring program for all new teachers and school leaders that they include in the district-wide professional learning plans that they create. And as part of that regulatory requirement, LEAs are required to assemble school-based professional learning teams that include administrators, educators, and other stakeholders from within the school community to develop the mentoring program. And they do that by looking at evidence-based mentoring practices and then designing the program from there, given their local context and sort of needs. And so really the goal of that requirement was to try to ensure that there was a process in place in every school district at the local level to support all new teachers in a way that was intentionally designed to retain them and help them grow as professionals. So we also we have a professional standards and practices board for teaching here. So we work with our PSPB as well to create a set of tools and resources, including a set of standards for mentoring programs that are designed to help LEAs as they make these decisions about their programs. I do want to name a big challenge in this space, which is that we hear from districts all the time, like, of course, they want to have great mentoring for all teachers, but it's really hard to do well and it's really expensive, right? So as you mentioned, New York is a well-resourced state, which is great. But in addition to the funding that districts generally have to support their school programs, we're also lucky to have a state-supported grant program that's called the Mentor Teacher Internship Program. And so this is it's a annually supported $2 million program, which really is supplementary to the money that's already invested by school districts in the mentoring program. But that supplementary funding is really important. So it's a competitive grant that districts apply to receive. And if they're awarded the grant, they actually get the grant for 5 years. So they have plenty of time to implement it and see whether or not it's effective. And then really our approach with that grant was to try to incentivize districts to really take those mentoring programs and use the grant funding to further align them with really high quality practices. And so some examples of the things that we require of grantees are they have to have a well-defined process for selecting new mentors using a school-based committee that includes accomplished teachers that are identified by their peers. They have to have preset criteria for determining who can become a mentor. They have to design and implement a really high quality mentor training program to make sure that they have skills and the knowledge that they need to really work effectively to teach other teachers, because teaching teachers is different than teaching kids. And then another really important piece of that grant program is that they are required to give both the mentor and the mentee at least 10% release time from instructional responsibilities so that they have protected time to work together. And then the last piece that I want to emphasize about that grant program is that they're also required to have a process in place that uses both qualitative and quantitative data to evaluate the effectiveness of the mentoring program. And that includes collecting data from mentors, mentees, program coordinators, and other stakeholders about the quality of the supports that new teachers are receiving.
Great. Thank you for walking us through that. So I want to kind of transition us now to talk a little bit about how we can keep trained and experienced teachers in the profession. So I have two questions, one for each state, about state level efforts to do this. So I'm going to start with Mississippi. So Representative McCarty, can you tell us a little bit about some of the other state level efforts in Mississippi to retain more experienced teachers, such as the National Board Certification Incentive?
Yeah, so that's actually been around in Mississippi for quite a while, and we provide an additional $6,000 supplement to teachers across the state if they complete the National Board Certification Program. That's on top of their base salary and then whatever supplemental salary the district that they work in offers as well, if they should offer any. But it's a $6,000 annual supplement for 10 years. They get that supplement. Then there's an additional opportunity to earn $4,000 more a year for 10 years if you teach in a high need area. So those are like our critical shortage geographic areas. That program has been very successful. I remember when I was a kid, my mom went through that program, and I remember her and she and some of her teacher friends, huddled around the table working on their national board stuff. And all those teachers, they once they completed that, obviously stayed throughout the duration of the time that they could receive their supplement. But also, I can think of all the people, my mom's friends in her teacher group that were there studying with her. They all finished long, careers in the Mississippi education system, and we're generally just, better prepared for that job, and we were providing those professional development opportunities. So that's been really big. Another thing that we've done is offered the student loan forgiveness. For originally it was offered just to new teachers. It was the Winter Read teacher forgiveness, or it was repayment, not forgiveness, but a repayment program that paid over the course of 3 years. It would repay your student loans for any new teacher that was entering into the teacher workforce. If you went to a critical need area, the amount of repayment was substantially increased. So again, just trying to target those recruitment efforts in areas that were the most needy. And then once we saw the success of that program, we got it, first implemented with $2 million in funding. We wanted to make sure that that funding would cover the entirety of the 3-year repayment grant. So, once we saw the success of that and how many people applied and the wait list for that, we were able to put more money in. And this last year, we opened it up to basically allow any teacher to, existing teachers to apply for a repayment. And then again, extend that to those areas that were critical need. So I think that with the pay increase that we talked about already, we can't really say which one of those is which one of those recruited which teacher, but I think we can say that all of those things together have created, an environment where potential teacher candidates see an opportunity to earn more money. They see an opportunity to maybe make a little bit more outside of that salary in the profession that they've already chosen. That may make it more competitive with other industries. And I think that's kind of been the key for us in balancing all of that.
Thanks so much for that. And one thing that I'll note is that both of these programs, I think, also have a component of them where they get teachers who are in high needs districts also can earn more back on their loan forgiveness or more from National Board. So also a way to support high turnover, high shortage districts. So I'm going to turn it back over to our New York colleagues, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you've been thinking about policies, practices, and programs to support experienced teachers.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. So we learned early on, kind of when we were in the cauldron of the pandemic, that we had to build really substantive like stakeholder engagement consortia groups, because we quickly had to pivot regulation to, sometimes they were very temporary certification measures. Other times they were issues that surrounded our educator preparation programs and how they were going to deal with. For example, we had a teacher performance assessment that included videotaping that you could not do when we were in the pandemic. And then we had to quickly shift to things that were a little bit more long-term changes to the system and build in the innovative programs around that. So we too, you know, as Representative McCarty mentioned, we also have a National Board Certified Teacher annual grant program that's available to our teachers. It allows them, you know, similar, it allows them money to make sure that they can pay to get certified, in addition to allowing for like leave time and paying for substitute teachers as they get, you know, the Shanker Grant Award. To date, I think we've had about 2,500 candidates take advantage of that. It's not a huge budget every year. It's about 350,000+, but it's definitely been one of those substantive programs. And then one that's even larger than that, that we've had for many years, and is coordinated by our State University of New York system, our Master Teacher Program, is a program that allows for teachers to, our long-term teachers, to be able to get a $15,000 yearly stipend to make sure that they're getting like peer mentoring activities, content-oriented professional development. And what allows them to do is work with incoming teachers. And a lot of times it'll target areas like STEM, or areas like we've had a real need for like CTE certification in different areas. And then they even opened it up this year, kind of an innovative way of dealing with a lot of the issues going on with mental health and social emotional issues in our districts. They opened up a cohort in the Master Teacher Program for like our school counselors, and had our first cohort of that in the program. And then I want to kind of flip it real quickly to Alex to talk about a couple of the other issues we've been dealing with the teacher evaluation system that tie into a lot of these innovative programs.
Sure, thanks, Bill. So yeah, I know we're short on time, so I'll be very as brief as I can be. I like to talk a lot. But what I will say is, you know, when really a couple of years ago, we restructured our state education department to create this Office of Teacher and Leader Development. And the goal of that was really to try to bring some internal coherence to all of the work that we were doing that was around supporting our educator workforce. And so everything from our recruitment efforts, preparation, certification, professional learning, it's all sort of under one umbrella. And as we were doing that work, one of the things that really surfaced for us as a barrier for current teachers, like to feel positive about their experience as an educator, was our state's teacher evaluation system. We have had, it's been revised many times, but we have had basically the same version of teacher evaluation here in New York since 2011, starting with Race to the Top. And it's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to evaluation, and it overemphasizes student performance on standardized tests and evaluating teachers. And so what we did a couple of years ago was we, under the direction of our commissioner, brought together all of our key stakeholder groups, including our teachers union, our administrator union, our superintendents association, school boards, and we drafted model legislation that we got everyone to sort of compromise on to really reform that system, to try to turn it from something that felt punitive to teachers to something that was really designed to support their professional growth, and that could be tied into these things like mentoring and career ladders and national board certification. And actually just in June, the governor signed that legislation. And it will substantially overhaul teacher evaluation system, make it strongly aligned to our teaching standards and our educational leadership standards, and really tie it to professional growth opportunities for educators. So we're really excited about that work.
Great, thank you so much. Well, as Alex already noted, we are getting near the top of the hour, and so we have time for a few questions. People have been populating some wonderful questions in the chat, so thank you so much for that. We're going to take a few of them. Some are more targeted towards individual states and some are more open. But I'm going to start with one that I know New York has been working on, and I don't know, there may be some things happening in Mississippi as well. But one of the audience members has asked about programs that are recruiting more teachers of color and just how you've been thinking about the diversification of the teacher workforce in your states, and whether that's come up in any of these policy efforts or pushes for any of the things we've talked about, or maybe other programs that we haven't talked about. And maybe I'll pass it over to the New York colleagues first, because I know this is something that you all have been working on.
Yeah, we actually had, at the behest of the legislature, we had to do an educator diversity report, a really comprehensive report about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And like the rest of the nation, obviously we have, some pretty significant educator diversity gaps and leadership as well in our leadership titles. So to address that, we wanted to put together like a number of innovative programs. One of them came out of New York State's My Brother's Keeper initiative, and it was the Teacher Opportunity Corps. And this is one of those programs that, in some cases you say, is the money going to go kind of broadly across all school districts? And is it going to go to the school districts, or is it going to be a partnership with our educator preparation programs? And the Teacher Opportunity Corps was specifically designed to address underrepresented populations, especially, in our high needs areas and districts. And the grants would go to the colleges to put together a real comprehensive program that would try to recruit students. And to date, we've had close to 1,000 teachers that we've, were able to get through our programs, get certified in different areas. And then another one connected to that is a little bit of a longer standing program. It's been around for a longer time. It's called the Teachers of Tomorrow. And that's a much larger program, usually between $20 and $25 million a year are appropriated to this. And it really works with all different aspects of like teacher certification and retainment. We even do there's even summer internship training programs related to that. So those are just a couple examples. And then Alex, very quickly, if you could give us a quick overview of maybe like a Grow Your Own or pipeline initiative.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So one thing that I would emphasize is we have created a whole set of tools and resources for our local educational agencies around creating Grow Your Own programs. That's really designed around some key focal areas, such as recruiting underrepresented populations into the profession, leveraging pathways for TAs to become teachers, and also encouraging partnerships between school districts and higher education institutions to create sort of job-embedded pathways into teaching. And all of those resources are really designed around the idea of making teaching more accessible and affordable, but also but doing that in a way that's high retention, right? So not shortcuts, but just creating really practice-based education programs that maybe allow for like a TA to be able to stay in their job as a TA while they're also being prepared to be a teacher. And I'll drop a link in the chat, just in the interest of time, to our website for that, in case it's helpful for folks.
Great, thank you so much. And Representative McCarty, I'm not sure if this has come up in Mississippi, but just, state efforts to think about recruiting more teachers of color into the Mississippi teaching profession.
Sorry, I almost made it to the end without talking with my microphone on mute. I'm really glad that this came up, actually, because we have a great program that's not gotten a lot of attention in Mississippi. I think partially because it was initiated by the department, not through legislation, but the department initiated it, and then the legislature has continued to fund it once their funding ran out. But it's the Mississippi Teacher Residency Program, which is specifically designed to recruit underrepresented groups into the teacher workforce. So it's been hugely successful. I think there's been about $10 million that's gone through the program, which, in our budget terms is a lot. That specifically, to go into communities and recruit people that are from underrepresented groups in those communities at an early age, at the earliest possible time, to try to encourage them to get into the teaching profession. The program comes with a stipend for the candidate. It covers, the cost of their tuition, books, things like that. And then they have to teach in an underrepresented area for at least 2 years. So we've had this for a couple of years now. Like I said, it's been hugely popular. It's actually a dual certification program. So they get an elementary education certification and a special needs certification. So those are two of our highest need areas in Mississippi. So again, it's a great program. I know we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but it's called Mississippi Teacher Residency. There's a whole page about it on the MDE website. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in any more information about that to look it up on our State Department website.
Great. Well, we are almost at the top of the hour, and actually this is a great segue because a lot of the questions in the chat were about different innovative teacher preparation programs. We've just heard about a few of them, and that's actually going to be the topic for our next webinar, which will be coming up in just a couple of days. So first, I just want to thank all of our panelists. We just really appreciate you joining us today and sharing your experiences. And just so everyone in the audience knows, this isn't the last conversation that we're going to have about teachers and the teacher workforce and teacher preparation. And in fact, on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, the webinar is going to focus a lot on high retention, high quality, and affordable pathways into the profession like teacher residency programs. So if that kind of piqued your interest at the end, you'll get a chance to really dig into that on Thursday. And then next week, on Tuesday, we'll be talking about chronic absenteeism, and on Thursday, education finance. So again, I just want to thank everyone, all of our panelists, all of our co-sponsors for being here today. Really appreciate you. And we really look forward to seeing you all back for the future webinar series. So thanks, everyone.